The mountains woke each morning before the sun itself, draped in a gauze of mist that curled to the tall timber and softened the rough edges of the land. In that breathless hour, before even the birds found voice, a man worked alone. The steady thump of his axe against pine echoed down into the valley, each strike shaping both wood and the silence that had come to find him. His shirt clung to his back, darkened with sweat, though the air was still cool. He paused between swings, leaning on the half of the axe, chest rising and falling. The cabin behind him stood half-finished. 4 walls of raw-hewn logs, a roof line yet to close against the sky. To some it looked meager, but to him it was a fortress, each log stacked by his own hand, each nail a step away from what he had once been. The land did not forgive, but it offered him something rarer than forgiveness: silence. Out here, a man could bury his noise, his sins, and let the wind carry them where no one listened. Or so he had told himself when he first rode into these mountains with only a horse, a rifle, and the ghost he tried to leave behind. Yet even silence had a voice. It spoke through the trees when the wind bent their crowns. It spoke through the river, gnawing rocks to sand. It spoke loudest when he walked the grove he had avoided for months, maybe years, though it lay only a few minutes' ride from his new home. The pine stood taller than most, its trunk wide enough that 2 men could not wrap it with their arms. Its bark was dark, grooved like old scars. On its surface, faint but stubborn, were letters carved long ago, his initials cut with the sharp edge of a boy's knife, beside another set of letters that had once carried warmth enough to set the night alight. Weather had chewed at the carving, snow and rain working their will, but still the marks endured. His fingers, rough from tools and rope, touched them as though they burned. He remembered the sound of her laughter when the blade first bit into that bark, the way she teased him for carving too deep, for wanting permanence in a world that tore permanence apart. He had pressed the knife anyway, declaring that even if the land itself turned to dust, those letters would remain. Foolish words. Yet here they still were, stubborn as the ache in his chest. He withdrew his hand, flexing it like a man who had touched fire. The forest pressed close around him, its stillness heavy, as though it too knew he had no business returning to this tree. He should have left it to rot, to fade, like the other pieces of his past. But men were not made of clean slates. They were made of what they carried, and what they buried, and what clawed his way back to the surface no matter how deep they dug. He spat into the dirt, cursing softly, and turned back toward his cabin. His horse lifted its head from where it grazed nearby, ears twitching. The animal was lean, scarred on one flank from a wound that had never healed quite right. A beast built for endurance, not beauty, much like the man who owned it. The cabin waited, raw with catching the first hints of light bleeding across the ridge. He picked up the hammer lying on the porch, forcing himself into the rhythm of labor again, wood against iron, iron against nail, each sound driving memory deeper into the dark. By the time the sun cleared the pines, his shoulders burned, his hands shook, his mouth was dry with the taste of dust. It was the rattle of wheels on stone that drew him from his work. A wagon creaked its way along the faint track at the base of the valley. The driver, an old trader he knew by sight, tipped his hat when he caught the cowboy's eye. The man slowed his team, raised a hand, and called something across the distance. Words carried oddly in the mountain air, but few reached clear enough. Folks say somebody's come back. The cowboy's hammer still mid-swing. The trader's wagon clattered on, leaving only the scent of mule sweat and dust in its wake. He stood motionless, hammer hanging loose at his side. A muscle jumped in his jaw, then tightened. The valley, moments before only a canvas of silence and birdsong, seemed to press close around him. The trader had offered no name. He hadn't needed to. There was only one return that mattered. He let the hammer fall into the dirt. His boots carried him toward the grove before he even knew he had chosen that direction. The horse followed, hooves soft on the pine needles. He reached the tree again, stood before the carving, and placed his hand against it as though it might tell him the truth. The bark was rough, the cuts faded, yet the letters were still clear enough to read. His initials, hers, side by side. The air smelled of sap and earth and something older, something that felt like memory given weight. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind him he saw her face as it had been, bright with firelight, mouth soft with promises spoken under starlit skies. He felt the echo of her hand in his. He remembered the night he chose another path, the night the world split into before and after. His eyes opened. The letters were still there, carved deeper into him than into the tree. The trader's words echoed through him, refusing to fade. Somebody's come back. For a long moment he stood in the grove, the mist breaking apart as the sun climbed higher, painting the pines gold. His hand dropped from the tree. His breath came slow, as though he'd been struck. When at last he turned back toward the cabin, the mountain air had shifted. The silence that had once sheltered him now felt brittle, ready to shatter at the first touch. He did not know yet whether he wanted to break, or feared it already had. The town lay low in the valley. Its wooden storefronts crouched like weary sentinels against the wind. Dust drifted to the main street in restless spirals, stirred by the hooves of a single rider moving at an unhurried pace. The woman's coat hung long and dark, weighted with road dust, the brim of her hat casting a shadow that kept her eyes unreadable. Her horse, ribs showing through a dull coat, plodded forward with the patience of something that had carried her too far, complained now. No one spoke when she first appeared, though heads turned. A blacksmith leaned against his forge, squinting. Two boys stopped their game of marbles forgotten in the dust as they gawked. The saloon doors creaked open just enough for faces to peer through. She did not look at them, not directly, but she felt the weight of their stares, the murmurs rising like dry grass catching fire. She guided the horse to the watering trough, dismounted with slow grace, and let the reins fall. Her boots struck the earth in a sound that seemed to echo louder than it should. She bent to fill a tin cup from the trough, her reflection broken on the water's surface. A woman older than the one who had once left these mountains looked back at her, features sharpened, shoulders straightened by hard roads, eyes that had seen both hunger and betrayal. Inside the saloon, the piano stopped mid-note. Conversations thinned to whispers. She pushed through the bat-wing doors, and the scent of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies closed around her. The room stiffened. A barkeep with thinning hair froze, polishing a glass. He knew her face, as did most here, though years had passed. Time had not softened memory. It had only added another layer of curiosity, sharpened now by the simple fact that she had returned. She scanned the room once, her expression a mask carved from stone. Her gaze brushed over faces, some familiar, some new, before settling on an empty table in the corner. She sat. The whispers grew bolder, threading through the smoky air. Words like left him, ran off, shouldn't have come back. She did not flinch. She poured herself silence and drank it like whiskey. Yet inside, her chest tightened as if each whisper were a pebble tossed into still water. She had known this would happen. The town had a memory as long as the mountains. Still, she had come. The trail behind her was darker than anything these voices could throw. A man she once knew lived not far from here, building himself a new life out of pine and stone. The thought of him tugged at her in ways she hated. An old ache, dulled by time but never gone. She had seen enough roads to know the past was never behind. It always rode a few steps back, waiting for the moment you slowed. The door opened again, spilling harsh sunlight across the floorboards. She glanced up, pulse quickening before she caught herself. Not him, just a ranch hand hauling supplies. She turned away, but the slip of hope betrayed her. She cursed herself quietly, wrapping her hand around the tin cup to keep it from trembling. By nightfall, she was gone from the saloon, walking the edge of town where lantern light gave way to shadows. Her horse waited where she had tied it. She mounted and guided it toward the dark ridge, drawn by something stronger than sense. The trail grew rougher, the pines thicker, the stars a cold fire above. She did not need a map. Her bones knew the way. When at last she saw the faint glow of a cabin through the trees, she stopped. A figure moved in the yard, the hammer of a man who had built every inch of that shelter ringing against the night. She did not call out. She sat in the saddle, watching from the darkness, every heartbeat a war between caution and longing. His shoulders were broader now, his stance heavier, as though solitude had carved him into stone. The sight struck her harder than she expected. He turned suddenly, as if sensing eyes upon him. The lantern light caught his face. For a long second, the years collapsed. He saw her, though distance lay between them. Neither moved closer. Neither raised a hand. Their eyes locked across the quiet, and in that silence, the years they had lost pressed down on them like a weight neither could carry alone. She urged her horse back before the moment broke, guiding it into the cover trees. Her breath came sharp, her chest tight with a feeling she had fought down for too long. She told herself she would leave it there, that she had no right to return to his life. But when the trail bent, she saw the grove ahead, the tall pine rising like a sentinel among its kin. She dismounted, lantern in hand, and walked to it. The air smelled of resin and damp earth. She found the carving at once, the letters faint but legible, worn yet stubborn. Her hand lifted, fingers brushing the grooves. She felt the years collapse again. Remembered the way his knife had pressed into the bark, the way they had laughed like fools at the thought that a tree could outlast them. Her throat tightened. She pressed her palm against the letters as though holding them in place. The lantern light shook with the tremor in her hand, throwing shadows across the bark. The silence of the grove was deep, almost holy, and in it she heard both the man she had loved and the mistakes that had torn them apart. The flame in the lantern flickered, threatening to die. She lowered it, staring at the initials as if they might vanish if she looked away. A bitter smile tugged her lips. The carving had survived snow, storms, and time itself. But she wondered whether they, the people behind the letters, had weathered as well. The night deepened around her. She stood before the tree, unable to leave, knowing that tomorrow the weight of her return would only grow heavier. The past was no longer content to stay buried. It had risen from the bark, carved deep, waiting to demand its reckoning. Rain threatened all afternoon, thick clouds gathering above the ridges, their bellies swollen with storm. The air carried the taste of metal, the scent of wet pine waiting to break. He sat on the porch of his cabin, rifle across his knees, listening to hush before weather turned violent. When the sound of hooves came through the trees, he knew without needing to look who it was. Some things the land told a man before his eyes did. She appeared from the shadows, her coat dark with dust, her horse breathing hard. She dismounted slowly, deliberate, as though unsure whether to approach. For a moment they only stared at each other, the silence so taut it might snap with the next breath. "You shouldn't have come," he said at last, his voice low, worn with both warning and want. Her jaw tightened. "You think I don't know that?" She stepped closer, her boots sinking into the damp soil, her eyes fixed on him with a steadiness that betrayed the tremor underneath. Inside the cabin, the lantern threw long shadows across raw timbers. She stood near the fire, hands out as though she needed warmth, but not daring to take it. He remained at the table, arms folded, gaze sharp, his silence a wall she could not cross. "I didn't ride back for memories," she said. "I came because I had no choice left." His brow furrowed. "There's always a choice." "Not for me." Her voice cracked but quickly steadied. "Not with them behind me." The word them hung heavy, like smoke refusing to rise. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Outlaws." Her silence was answer enough. He sat back, running a callous hand over his jaw. "So you brought a storm to my doorstep." A flash of hurt crossed her face. "You think I'd risk coming here if there's another road?" For a long moment, the only sound was of fire, which snapping like old bones. He studied her, every line of her face, every shadow of the years gone. She was both the woman he remembered and someone forged anew, hardened by choices he could only guess at. "You left once," he said, quieter now. "Left me standing in the dust without a word." Her throat worked before she spoke. "I left because staying meant your death. There are things you never knew, things I couldn't tell you then." He rose, pacing toward the fire. Anger warred with something softer, something he despised for still living in him. "And you think I should believe you now?" She met his gaze unflinching. "Believe what you want. But the men chasing me, they don't stop. Not for mercy. Not for law. If you want me gone, I'll ride. But they'll still come. And they'll burn whatever they can't take." The storm outside broke then, rain lashing against the roof, thunder rolling like gunfire across the mountains. He stared into the flames, their glow catching the sharp edge of his expression. "They'll find me here, whether I stay or not," she whispered. "You've built a life in these hills, but they'll tear apart same as they did mine." Something inside him shifted. He had come here to escape the past, to bury it under timber and sweat. Yet here it stood again, dripping rain onto his floor, eyes burning with the same fire that had once made him carve their names into living bark. He moved closer, his voice roughened by more than anger. "What do they want?" "Me." The word cut like glass. "And whatever price they think I owe. I don't have it, so they'll take blood instead." The room darkened with the storm, the lantern flickering. He saw her hands tremble and quickly still them. She had carried herself strong into this cabin, but he knew fear when he saw it. Not fear of death, but of repeating the same mistake twice, of dragging him into ruin again. "Why come here then?" he asked. Her answer was barely audible. "Because you're the only one who ever fought for me, even when I didn't deserve it." The words hollowed him out. He turned away, but his hand tightened around the back of the chair until the wood groaned. He had sworn never to fight another battle that wasn't his, never to bleed for something he couldn't keep. And yet, standing there, he already knew the truth. He would not let her face this storm alone. The fire popped. Rain hissed through the chimney. He met her eyes again, and for the first time since she had ridden back, the silence between them felt less like a wall and more like a bridge. "Then we fight," he said. A breath escaped her chest, heavy with both relief and dread. She nodded once, the smallest motion, but it carried the weight of years. He fetched his rifle from the wall, ran a cloth down the barrel, checked the chamber with hands that remembered war too well. The storm rattled the cabin, the land itself restless. She sat near the fire, shoulders slumping, the hardness in her posture cracking just enough for exhaustion to show through. Neither spoke of what it meant, of what standing together again might stir, of how easily old wounds could reopen. It was enough for now to know they would face what came side by side. When the storm eased, he stepped outside. The air was sharp with rain, the earth breathing smoke from its own wet skin. He looked toward the grove, where the pine loomed against the night sky, lightning still flickering far behind it. The carving was out there, waiting, scarred but unbroken, just as they were. He returned to the cabin, closing the door against the wind. Tomorrow would bring riders, maybe death. But tonight, in the fragile quiet after the storm, they had chosen. The dawn came raw and brittle, a pale light stretching across the ridges, carrying with it the chill of the storm that had passed. Smoke curled thin from the cabin's chimney. Though neither of them had slept, he sat at the table cleaning his rifle, each motion steady, deliberate, as though repetition might still his restless thoughts. She moved quietly through the small room, packing cartridges into a leather pouch, her face a mask carved against fear. The silence between them was not empty. It was heavy with everything unspoken, weighted with the knowledge that the day would not end without blood. By mid-morning the sound came, distant hooves rolling like thunder through the timber. He stepped onto the porch, rifle slung across his chest, eyes narrowing against the glare. She joined him, her hand brushing the pistol at her hip. 5 riders crested the ridge, dark shapes against the sky, their horses restless, breath steaming in the cool air. They spread out with the confidence of wolves circling prey. The riders slowed as they neared the cabin. The man in front, lean as a whip with a scar dragging his mouth into a permanent sneer, raised a hand. "You've got something belongs to us," he called, his voice carrying too easily through the still air. She stiffened, her breath sharp. He said nothing, standing like stone on the porch, the rifle leveled but not yet raised. "Send her out," the outlaw continued, "and maybe we leave your pretty shack standing." She stepped forward, but he blocked her with the tilt of his arm. His voice, when it came, was quiet but flint-hard. "This land's mine. She stays." The sneer widened. "Then you die with her." The first shot cracked the silence apart. Smoke bloomed, horses screamed, and the cabin's walls shuddered under lead. He pulled her down, both of them diving for cover as splinters rained from the doorframe. The fight was not neat. It was chaos, dirt and blood and gunpowder tearing through the quiet valley. From a window he fired, one outlaw toppling from his saddle into the mud. She braced herself against the wall, her pistol steady, each shot precise. Their breaths came ragged, their ears ringing with a storm of bullets. But the outlaws pressed harder, circling, firing from every shadow. A lantern shattered, flame licking at the floorboards before she smothered it with a blanket. Smoke stung her eyes, her chest burning, but still she fought. He reloaded, his hands moving by instinct, though his shoulder bled where a bullet had grazed him. When the shooting lulled, they heard a voice outside, closer now. Not the scarred man, but another, one that froze her blood. It was a voice from years past, one that had once whispered in the dark before turning to betrayal. "You should have known I'd come for you," the voice called, mocking cruel. "You think you can run forever?" She faltered, her pistol dipping. He glanced at her, reading the truth in her face. This was no faceless enemy. This was the ghost that had driven her from him long ago. Her lips parted, but no words came. He gripped her shoulder hard enough to anchor her. Then this ends here. The outlaws charge again, a final push. The cabin rattled under the force. Glass shattered, smoke thickened. He kicked open the door, rifle blazing, cutting down another rider as thunder rolled across the mountains. She followed him out, heart hammering, her shots ringing true. The air reeked of iron and sap, of blood spilling into earth. It came down to the scarred leader and the ghost of her past. The first circled wide, firing wild, while the second dismounted, stalking toward her with a smile that dripped venom. She stood frozen, pistol empty, fear clawing her throat. He stepped between them, rifle raised, but the scarred leader's bullet caught him in the side, staggering him back against the pine grove. Blood ran hot down his ribs, his strength faltering. "No!" she cried, rushing to his side, but the ghost was already upon them. The final showdown came beneath the carved tree, its bark pitted and scarred, initials still faint in the dim light. The ghost raised his revolver, words slithering like poison. All that carving ever was, a lie. Time to cut the rest of it out. But she moved first, with a cry ripped from the marrow of her being. She snatched the knife from his belt and drove it forward. The blade found its mark, years of fear and running ending in one brutal motion. The ghost collapsed at the roots of the pine, his blood mingling with the sap, weeping from its bark. The scarred leader, seeing the tide broken, spurred his horse and fled into the trees. The others lay silent in the mud. She knelt beside him, hands pressed his wound, her tears mixing with the rain that had begun to fall again. His breath came rough, shallow, but his eyes found hers, steady despite the pain. "Guess some things don't wash away," he murmured, his voice a rasp. She bent close, her forehead resting against his. "Then let them stay. Let them root deep." The storm eased, light breaking through the clouds, painting the grove in pale gold. They sat beneath the pine, its initial scar but unbroken, the past and present carved together in bark and blood. He reached for her hand, their fingers lacing tight, not with the fragility of memory but with the strength of something remade. The valley was quiet again, save for the drip of rain from the branches, the land itself bearing witness to their choice. And though the fight had left them wounded, though the road ahead promised hardship, there was a sense between them that the silence of these mountains would no longer be empty. It would be shared. The tree stood over them, scarred yet standing, as they leaned against its roots and faced the dawn together.